Hello, everyone. Welcome to Spirit, connecting with your spirit guides and ancestors. This is going to be a fun one. I've been looking forward to this one all week. Um, the Blue Witch has a lot to get through today. So we have time to answer some questions at the end. I'm going to hand it right over. And again, I just want to say thank you for your support of um, Witchsea and the Blue Witch. And if you've never met me before, I'm Trish. I am the CEO and co-founder of Witchsea. So thank you again for all your support. It means really means the world to us, and we appreciate it. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to the Blue Witch, and we're going to talk about spirits and ancestors today.
Hey guys. Okay, so at the beginning of all my webinars, we always start with a deep breath. So let's just get grounded, put your feet on the floor, just bring yourself into the present moment. And because I think I needed that more than probably half of you, I needed a deep breath coming off all that, the celestial things that were happening. And I got bashed with migraines and it's been crazy. But this webinar is probably going to be, I don't want to say chaotic, but like maybe possibly a little bit chaotic because my original notes and outline that I set up for this webinar of the things that I wanted to talk about, it just ended up amounting to so much. There's so much to go over. And I know everybody wants to get to like the how do we initiate communication? Like, what do we do? How do we set up the altar? And we're going to get to that. We are going to get to that. But there's so much more that you need to know first. Like it's the things that people don't necessarily want to hear, but you need to hear it. So I've kind of decided like if I don't, because I keep coming up with other things that I want to add and I want to show you a book and I want to read some things out of the book for you. And so if I don't get to cover everything that I want to, we will set up like a part 2 in April, because I'm pretty booked out through March, but we did discuss that. So we may do a part 2 in April, but we'll see. I'm gonna jump in so we're not wasting any more time here, but I just wanted to hang with me. Okay, so the first thing that I want to say is you do not need to be psychic to be here. You don't need to see spirits. You don't need to hear voices. You don't need to read tarot. You don't need to have crystals in every single room of your house. If you do, that's great. If you don't, that's also great. Like this space is really just about understanding the idea of spiritual support and learning how people experience it. And everyone experiences it differently. That's what makes this such a broad topic. Because a lot of people get curious about spirit guides and ancestors, especially after something small happens, something small but noticeable, and like maybe your intuition is like weirdly accurate about something, or you had a dream that felt a little too real. Maybe you keep seeing the same numbers or symbols and you're like, okay, like what the fuck is actually going on here, right? So maybe nothing dramatic has happened to you at all and you're just curious about the topic, and curiosity is perfectly good reason to be here too. So now, when people first hear the phrase spirit guides, their brain tends to go straight to something very dramatic, like a glowing being floating in the corner giving life instructions. And I'm not saying that people don't have very vivid spiritual experiences sometimes. That's I've had those where I could physically see, touch, and hear the spirits. It's wild, but it's not the typical. It's not the way most people experience guidance, and it's not the way I experience guidance the majority of the time. When I did have those experiences, I was literally I was dying. So take that for what you will. I don't know. Was it the drugs? Who knows? I could have been hallucinating, but I saw what I saw. Okay. And I tried to tell the nurses. My mom told me to shut up because they was going to put me on the third floor if I didn't. So it happens to everybody very differently. For most people, though, spirit guides are much more subtle than that. The simplest way to understand a spirit guide is that they're believed to be non-physical, like a non-physical source of support connected to your life path. Their role is not to control your life or make decisions for you. You still have free will. You still get to make your own choices, even the questionable ones, because we've all made those. Guides are more like quiet advisors, right? Like they're associated with intuition and insight and those moments where something suddenly just makes sense. So, when you've been thinking about a situation like for days and then out of nowhere the answer just kind of like clicks, that's the kind of moment, like that's one of the ways, like that's one of the moments and the ways that people describe guidance showing up in their lives. So before anybody starts like blaming every random thought on a spirit guide, because your brain is very capable of producing nonsense on its own, okay? And I'm not saying that you're producing nonsense. I'm just saying that like spiritual psychosis is a real thing too. We're going to talk about later, we're going to talk about like discernment. But for right now, let's do like the difference between intuition, anxiety. We're going to talk about imagination. Genuine insight is a huge part of this work. But the general idea is that guidance tends to feel like a nudge rather than a command. My brain produces nonsense on a daily basis. So does mine, Trish. But yeah, it's just it feels more like a nudge. Like another thing that surprises people is that most traditions believe everyone has access to some form of guidance. It's not just like spiritual people, it's not just psychics. Every culture has their belief in this. It's the difference is awareness. So some people go their whole life never really thinking about it. Other people start to notice little patterns or moments that make them curious. So once curiosity shows up, people usually start paying more attention. Another thing that beginners always ask is where guides actually come from. And the honest answer is that different traditions explain this differently. Some believe that guides are souls who lived as humans, they had human lives before, and now they help others. Some believe that spiritual teachers connected to, that they are like spiritual teachers connected to certain kinds of wisdom. Some see them more as protective energies that have always been connected to someone. There isn't one explanation that everybody agrees on. And honestly, you don't need to lock yourself into one belief system right away, anyways. What matters more, especially when you're starting out, is just understanding the role that guides are believed to play. Um, so, and most descriptions do agree on at least a few things, right? So, first, guides respect your free will. They are not running your life. They're supportive. They are not controlling. Their communication tends to be subtle, which is actually why a lot of people miss it. People expect guidance to look like a giant sign from the universe with flashing lights and dramatic music, but most of the time, it's much quieter than that. It's a feeling, it's a realization, it's a moment of clarity that shows up right exactly when you need it. Another thing that people talk about is different types of guides. There's, again, the exact labels will even change depending on who you ask. But I thought someone was knocking on my back door. But yeah, so like there's also different types of guides. And I'm going to actually I'm going to show you a part of this book here in a little bit on that. But one example, okay, so people talk about is like a guardian guide. This is usually described as a guide that has been connected to someone for most of their life. The role is often protective, helping steer someone away from certain situations or towards opportunities. Another category that a lot of people mention are teacher guides. These are believed to show up when someone is going through a specific learning phase in their life. So once that lesson or growth period is complete, that guide may step back. You may never speak with that guide again. That's the thing too, is like guides kind of come and go, like in your spiritual court. Your spiritual court is constantly evolving and changing. So you may not always have the same guides. There are specific guides that do stay with you, like the whole time, like your entire life, but then there are guides that come and go. They're just there for a season or to teach you a lesson or to help you get through something, and then they're gone. So think of it like different teachers during different semesters of your life, right? Some people also talk about animal guides or symbolic guides. These usually show up in dreams or imagery, and they represent certain qualities like courage, patience, awareness, rather than literally being a spirit animal walking around your house. Although, if an owl starts attending your family dinners, we might need to talk because I want to know how you did that. I want one of those. Okay. But symbolism is actually a huge part of how spiritual communication is believed to work. Tarot reading told me Tarot reading told me I'd get physical nudge. Happened twice in yep. Yeah, see, it is. It's very subtle. So yes. Now before we get deeper into like communications and signs, I do want to say something that's really important, especially for beginners. Working with spiritual concepts should never make you feel like you're losing control of your life. Healthy spiritual practice actually does quite the opposite. It strengthens your awareness and responsibility for your choices. Guides may offer insight, but you're still the one making the decisions. You're still the one living your life day to day. If you ever hear somebody teaching that a guide should control your choices or speak for you constantly, that's usually a sign that something has gotten exaggerated or unhealthy with that person. Because guidance should feel supportive, not controlling. And like you're going to hear me say things like that over and over again because it's important that you realize this. Another thing that's helpful to understand is that people experience guidance differently. Again, some people are very visual thinkers, so they might notice imagery in dreams or meditations. Other people might experience guidance more as intuition, gut feeling, or a sudden understanding. Some people notice patterns or synchronicities that keep showing up with certain situations. And some people simply just have moments where something suddenly becomes clearer, and all of those experiences fall under intuitive awareness. But spirit guides are only one side of this conversation, right? Because the other type of spiritual connection that people talk about, and in many ways, the older tradition, is ancestors. And ancestors are a little bit different. So when people hear the word ancestors, most people immediately think of family members who have passed away, grandparents, great grandparents, people in your bloodline. And yes, that is definitely part of it. But ancestor work is actually a little broader than just someone in my family tree. At its core, ancestors are simply people who came before you, the people whose lives, choices, survival, and experiences eventually led to you being here. That means you do not have to be, they're not always related to you. Everyone kind of has this misconception that all of your ancestors are related to you. They're not. They're not. They could have been family friends. They could have cared deeply for someone in your family, which makes them care for you. Which, if you really think about it for like just a second, it's really kind of wild, because every single person in this room, like in this webinar, exists because thousands of people before us lived entire lives. Like they struggled, they made decisions, they moved places, they survived things, they built families and lost things, and they figured things out. And somehow all of that eventually led to you existing right now. And that's a lot of history behind one person. I One of the most frequently asked questions, or one of the things that I hear the most, is like, what, I don't think I should work with my ancestors, or my ancestors were colonizers, or they owned slaves, or they were horrible people. But you have to stop to consider that the human race goes back like 300,000 years, if not further. And there's, depending on which resource you're looking at, some of them say further, but your bloodline goes all the way back through those 300,000 years. So think about when you do like your ancestry or your family tree, you're going back into the 1700s. If you're lucky, the 1600s, the 1500s. But like past that point, they didn't really keep very good records. And that is only back a few hundred years. Like, that's really not that far back in the grand scheme of things. So just because your tree ends there or you can't trace it further back does not mean that it ends. You have an army of people behind you wanting to support you, wanting to help you, wanting to be there for you, offering what they can. And sometimes it's just people don't realize that, like, you don't have to call if you're trying to work with ancestors. You do not have to call on your recent ancestors. You can pick and choose. You can go all the way back in them 300,000 years. You do not have to work with people that you considered, bad or that have done things. But yeah, I mean, many cultures believe that some of those ancestors remain spiritually connected to their lineage, not like a creepy way, but in a way where, like, not like they're just standing behind you watching you brush your teeth, right? But more like a continued thread of connection. Um, Ancestor traditions exist all over the world. In many African traditions, ancestor reverence is central to spiritual life there. In parts of Asia, families maintain ancestor altars and regularly honor the people who came before them. In indigenous traditions across the world, ancestors are seen as guides and protectors and keepers of cultural wisdom. So, this idea the dead remain connected to the living is not some like trendy modern concept. Humans have believed in ancestral presence for thousands of years. Now, something that's important to understand is that not every ancestor automatically becomes a spiritual guide. Because let's be honest for a second, not every person in your family line was a wise sage, right? Every family has like a few characters in the family tree. We all know this. If you start digging through your genealogy long enough, you're going to find at least one person where you're like, oh, okay, that explains a lot. Some people talk about talk about ancestor guidance. They refer to ancestors who are well. Like we want to work with ancestors who are well, who are healed, that are supportive, not just every single person who ever existed in your lineage. In a lot of traditions, there's actually a process of honoring and connecting specifically with benevolent ancestors, the ones who want the lineage to grow, to heal, to move forward in a healthy way. Because here's the thing people sometimes forget is that ancestors were human. They had personalities, they had flaws, they had strengths and experiences just like we do. Some carried wisdom, some carried trauma, some carried both. And part of modern ancestor work is acknowledging that reality. They're not perfect. Not all of them are perfect. It's not about pretending that the past was perfect. It's about recognizing that there are threads of strength and resilience and knowledge that came through generations. And sometimes those threads are still accessible. Not one, or one of the reasons that ancestor connection feels very powerful for a lot of people is because it's so personal. Spirit guides are often described as spiritual mentors connected to your path. Ancestors, on the other hand, are connected to your story, your bloodline, like your cultural roots, your inherited history. So even if you don't know your family history very well, you still carry pieces of that lineage. Another thing that I get asked a lot, what if I'm adopted? And that comes up a lot too. What if I'm adopted? I don't know my parents. I don't know anything about myself. You have a couple options there. You can still connect to your bloodline. You can still connect to your lineage. You can call upon your ancestors. Are you going to be able to name them by name? Probably not. If you can find out your parents' names, you can trace your bloodline back. You could also do like ancestry DNA and stuff. Like we could go do a DNA test. That's what I did. Because I don't really know anybody on my father's side of the family, but you can get a lot of information that way. You can at least find out the areas and the regions that you came from, so you can then study those areas and figure out like what your ancestors would have been like. It's still a connection, and you're still going to build that personal relationship with them. Um, you're still going to have their physical traits, their instincts. Your tendencies are going to relate, your resilience. A lot of that comes through generations. And it's and in spiritual traditions that work with ancestors, there's this idea that healing can move both directions through a lineage, meaning when somebody today begins healing patterns or learning new things or growing emotionally and spiritually, it can shift the energy of the lineage as a whole. So that is like something really cool. It's kind of like like healing your ancestral trauma type thing, breaking ancestral curses. That's what people mean when they start talking about that. So before anybody starts thinking though that they're like responsible for fixing their entire family tree, relax, because that's not the assignment. Um, Awareness of your lineage can bring perspective though. For example, sometimes people notice patterns repeating across generations. Maybe certain struggles keep showing up in different forms. Maybe certain strengths do. Ancestor awareness can help people recognize those patterns and consciously choose what they want to carry forward and what they want to leave behind. Now, when it comes to spiritual communication, ancestors are often believed to connect in ways that feel familiar. People sometimes dream about their relatives who have passed away. Sometimes they smell a familiar scent connected to somebody that they love. Sometimes certain objects or songs or memories show up at meaningful moments. And again, this does not mean that every memory or dream is a supernatural event. Grief, memory, and the human brain are very powerful on their own. But sometimes people have experiences that just feel a little different, right? Like a dream that feels unusually vivid, a moment that feels like a message of reassurance. And a lot of people interpret those moments as ancestral presence. One thing that I always encourage people to remember is that connection doesn't have to be dramatic to be meaningful. It really does not. The internet has created this weird expectation that spiritual experiences have to be huge and obvious to be valid. But most meaningful spiritual experiences are actually pretty quiet. They feel like comfort, they feel like reassurance, like a moment of clarity. Sometimes it's just the feeling that you're supported. Now, here's where spirit guides and ancestors start to overlap a little bit. Both are believed to offer forms of guidance or support, but the difference in the relationship, like there's a difference there. Spirit guides are usually described as helpers connected to your life path or your spiritual development. Ancestors are connected to your lineage and your roots and the story of how you got here. So one is more like a mentor and the other is more like family. Um, what I was reading the chat, and sometimes those two they intersect. Some people believe that certain ancestors can eventually take on guiding roles for their descendants, but um, before we talk about signs and communications, because I know that's the part everybody's curious about, we do need to talk about something that's like way more important, and that is boundaries. Boundaries are one of the most important parts of any kind of spiritual practice, and honestly, they do not get talked about enough. People get really excited about the idea of signs and messages and communication and all of that. But before you even start thinking about those things, you need to understand that you are always in charge of your own space and your own energy. Nothing about exploring spirituality means that you are suddenly open to everything. You still have boundaries. In fact, healthy spiritual work requires boundaries. And this is where I like to slow people down a little bit because, again, the internet has made a lot of this look chaotic. You'll see videos of people saying things like, I just opened myself up to whatever wanted to come through. And I'm like, why would you do that? Why? Like, why? You don't open the front door of your house and yell outside like, hey, anybody that wants to come in, just come on in. No, we don't do that. We lock the door and we decide who gets access to our home. Your spiritual space should work exactly the same way. So when people talk about connecting with guides or ancestors in a healthy way, they're talking about intentional connection, meaning that we are specifically inviting supportive, respectful, benevolent guidance. That's it. It's nothing random, nothing unknown. And honestly, most traditions that work with spirits or ancestors are very structured about that. They involve protection, they involve grounding, clear intention before any kind of spiritual work happens, which is actually really reassuring because it means that the goal is not to make people vulnerable, it's to keep them balanced. Now, grounding is another word that you're going to hear a lot in spiritual spaces. We've talked about this a lot of times before. Just in case this is your first time here, though, let's just simplify that real quick. Grounding just means staying connected to reality in your body while you explore spiritual ideas. You're just bringing your body back into the present moment. You still eat meals. You still take care of your responsibilities. You're still thinking critically about things. You don't abandon logic and suddenly blame every inconvenience on a cosmic message. If your phone battery dies, that's probably just your phone battery dying. Spiritual awareness should add perspective to your life, not replace common sense. And this is why I encourage beginners to approach this topic slowly and with curiosity rather than intensity, because you don't need to rush into anything. There's no prize for having the most mystical experience the fastest. In fact, when people who tend to develop the healthiest spiritual awareness are the ones that move slowly and observe their experiences over time. So let's talk about how guidance actually shows up. Because again, people tend to expect something dramatic, but most of the time, communication from guides or ancestors, if you interpret it that way, happens through things that already exist in human experience. Intuition is a big one. Intuition is the internal sense of knowing that doesn't always come from logical step by step thinking. It's more like your mind suddenly connecting the dots very quickly. You might have a gut feeling about a situation. You might feel strongly that something is a good idea or a bad idea. Sometimes you meet someone and your intuition like immediately tells you something about their energy. Like I don't like this person. I'm not feeling it. Something seems off, right? Intuition is a normal human ability. Everybody has it to some degree. Some people believe that guides or ancestors can influence like your these like intuitive moments by nudging your awareness towards certain insights. Another common experience that people talk about is dreams. Dreams are dreams are interesting. And I'd like to just take this second to point out that Monday we have a free webinar on dreams. So if you haven't seen that, go to my page, look under the events tab. It's not like a long thing. It's just like kind of an introduction, but it's a half an hour with a 15-minute Q&A. So definitely go check that out. But dreams are interesting because your brain is already working with symbolism and memory while you sleep. Your logical mind relaxes, which means that deeper thoughts and emotions sometimes come through more clearly. People sometimes report dreams where a relative appears and speaks to them, or dreams where a situation is explained in a very symbolic way. Again, not every dream is spiritual. Sometimes your brain is just processing your day. But occasionally, people have dreams that feel unusually vivid or emotionally clear. And those are the kinds of experiences that make people wonder about spiritual connection. And then there are synchronicities. Synchronicity is basically a meaningful coincidence. For example, like you're thinking about a specific topic or problem, and suddenly you encounter the exact information that you needed but it's like in a random place, or you keep encountering the same symbol or the same number or the same phrase is repeated during a time when you're thinking about something important. Now, the brain is really good at noticing patterns. That's part of how humans have survived for thousands of years, but sometimes patterns show up in ways that just feel oddly timed. And when people are exploring spiritual ideas, they sometimes interpret those moments as nudges of guidance. Another form of communication that people talk about is inner clarity. I also have a hard time remembering my dreams. This is probably the most common one, though, the inner clarity. And it's also the least dramatic, so it's easy to miss. It's that moment when something just suddenly makes sense. So like you've been confused about something maybe for days or weeks, and then one day the answer just becomes obvious, not because somebody told you, but because something inside you just shifted. Like it changed, and now you know. Those moments of clarity are often described as intuitive insight. But here's where discernment comes in. This is like one of my biggest discernment. Um, it's just a really important skill because discernment means learning how to evaluate your experiences without jumping to conclusions. Just because something feels meaningful doesn't automatically mean that it's a message from a spirit guide. Sometimes it's just your brain doing its job. Sometimes it's emotional processing. Sometimes it's just a coincidence. But sometimes it's okay to leave space for mystery. You don't have to like label every experience immediately. Like you can just notice it over time. If someone is paying attention to their intuition, their patterns, their experiences, they start to understand their own internal signals better. That self awareness is actually the most valuable skill in spiritual development. Not mediumship, not psychic ability, just self awareness. Because the more aware you are of your own thoughts, emotions, instincts, and patterns, the easier it becomes to recognize when something feels genuinely different. Okay, so there's one more thing that we need to talk about before we get into like practical ways for people to begin exploring this connection, and that is fear. Fear is something that comes up a lot whenever people start talking about anything spiritual, especially when spirits, ancestors, guides are involved. And honestly, a lot of that fear doesn't come from personal experience, it comes from movies, internet stories, people dramatizing things. And I'm going to tell you up front because I will die on this hill. Um, I'm actually going to be doing a video specifically on this. I had someone recently comment and they wanted to know like basically what the difference was between like a Ouija board and a pendulum board because due to past experiences they would not allow a Ouija board in their home. And my response to that is there's no difference. It's all the same. Whether you're divining with a, a board, a pendulum, cards, anything. That's all still divination. Anything can come through that tarot deck just as easily as it's going to come through a Ouija board. The only difference is I think more things happen to people that use things like Ouija boards and things like that is because they approach it differently. Ouija boards were originally marketed as toys, as games. And it doesn't matter because, her response was, I'm aware. I'm aware that, that Hollywood drama has no hold on me. That's what you think. That's what you think. But your subconscious, I'm telling you, you approach things differently based on the experiences that you've taken in, based on the movies that you've watched, based on your past experiences that you've had. So when we approach it differently, I think that some things are just approached with a little less respect. But if horror movies were accurate representations of spirituality, none of us would be here right now, right? Because we'd all be like boarding up our windows and refusing to ever light a candle again. But the reality is that most genuine spiritual traditions approach this work with a lot of calm, a lot of respect, and a lot of structure. It is not chaotic. It's not about inviting random energies into your life. It's about building intentional, respectful relationships with supportive forces. So, what tools you choose to use to do that, that is up to you. Now, I'm not saying, okay, well, if you don't like Ouija boards, it's all the same thing. What does it matter what you're using? That's not what I'm saying. If you feel uncomfortable with a board, it's not for you. Not because it's any more or less dangerous. It's just not for you. That's not what you're drawn to. You need to use what you're drawn to use. But the reality is, like I said, this is not, it should be structured. It should be approached with respect. Fear usually shows up when people feel like they don't understand exactly what they're dealing with, and that's completely normal. When something is unfamiliar, the brain tries to fill in the blanks, and sometimes it fills them with worst case scenarios. But here's something important. It's something important to remember here. Healthy spiritual connection should not make you feel scared or powerless, because this kind of, I know like this is like side quest, right? But like, I'm throwing all that stuff out there about the pendulums and the boards and the cards because it's an overlap. It's an overlap. When you're working with spirit guides, when you are working with ancestors, whether you're working with deities, whether you're whoever you are getting your guidance from, and whatever tools you're using to do that, these are like universal rules. It's the same for everything. Um, Guidance, when people experience it, it tends to feel, it should feel supportive, reassuring, or clarifying. It's not aggressive. It's not demanding, and it does not pressure you. If that happens to you, more than likely you have not set the boundaries that you should have set, or you have lacked in grounding. You have you weren't clear or specific with who you called upon. It's not usually like a tool problem, it's a people problem. So if something ever feels overwhelming, if it feels chaotic or intrusive, that's usually a sign that just somebody needs to step back, ground yourself, reconnect with your own sense of control, reset your boundaries. Do, if you feel like you need to just pause and step back, ground and cleanse, do that. Honestly, this is why I emphasize boundaries so much. That's why we talked about it earlier in the conversation, because when you approach spiritual topics with clear boundaries, you're already setting the tone for a balanced experience. Now, something else that can create fear for beginners is the idea that if you start exploring spirituality, suddenly everything in your life is going to just change overnight. People imagine that once they acknowledge guides or ancestors, their whole reality is just going to shift dramatically. But for most people, because I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but for most people, that is not how it happens. Spiritual awareness usually grows slowly. It's more like adjusting your awareness rather than stepping into a completely different world. You start noticing your intuition more. You start reflecting on patterns in your life. You become more mindful of your thoughts and decisions. Life still looks like life. You still go to work. You still have responsibilities. You still deal with everyday things like traffic and bills and forgetting where you put your phone. Spiritual awareness does not remove you from the normal world. If anything, it just helps you navigate it with a little more perspective. Now, something that I think is really helpful for beginners to understand is that guidance is not about perfection. Like we already talked about that. Some people get nervous that if they miss a sign or they ignore their intuition once, that somehow they've like ruined the connection. And that's not how it works either. Human beings are learning constantly. So sometimes we notice intuitive nudges, sometimes we don't. Sometimes we follow them, sometimes we ignore them. Guidance is not like a strict system where you get punished for making the wrong choice. It's more like having access to a helpful perspective, when you're open to it. And honestly, sometimes the biggest lessons come from the choices that don't go perfectly. Growth doesn't only happen when things go smoothly. Um, I want to let me skip through some of my notes here because I want to move on. I feel like we've covered some of this is kind of like, I know you guys want to get to something interesting. We're running on 40 minutes here. Okay, so here, let's talk about, let me get a drink real quick. Okay, so how do we start building a connection with guides or ancestors if you've never done anything like this before? And the good news is that beginning is actually very simple. It's pretty simple. You don't need complicated rituals. You don't need special tools. You don't need to memorize anything. The first step is simply just intention. Intention means consciously acknowledging that you are open to respectful, supportive guidance. Some people do this through like quiet reflection. Some people say a short prayer. Some people speak out loud or in their own mind. Others write in a journal. The exact method doesn't matter as much as the sincerity behind it. So, like, someone might sit quietly for a moment and say something like, if there are guides or ancestors who support my growth and well being, I'm open to learning and becoming more aware. And it doesn't have to be formal, it just has to be genuine. Another way that people can begin exploring this connection is through mindfulness. Mindfulness simply means paying attention to your internal experience, your thoughts, your feelings, instincts, without immediately judging them. When people start becoming more mindful, they often notice like intuitive nudges more clearly. They start recognizing when something feels aligned or misaligned in their life. And again, intuition is a normal human ability. Spiritual traditions simply believe that guidance can work through that natural ability that you already have. Journaling is also really helpful. Writing down dreams, intuitive thoughts, or meaningful experiences helps you see patterns over time. Sometimes something that felt random at first might start to make more sense when you look back on it later. You might notice that certain insights tend to appear when you're relaxed, or that certain symbols show up during important periods of your life. Journaling turns your experience into something that you can observe rather than something that you feel confused about. It's something that you can look back on and piece together. Another practice that people find helpful is gratitude towards ancestors. Um, and this doesn't have to be elaborate either. In many cultures, simply acknowledging the people who came before you is considered meaningful. Some people light a candle, some people say thank you, some people keep a photo of a relative nearby and reflect on their memory. It's less about ritual and more about respect, because whether someone believes in literal ancestral presence or not, remembering the people who came before us can be a powerfully grounding experience. And another thing that becomes really important as people continue to explore this awareness is eventually asking the question, okay, but how do I actually start the conversation? Right? Because noticing guidance is one thing, but a lot of people eventually want to be a little more intentional about it. And that's where witchcraft practices can actually be really helpful, not because the tools themselves are like magical switches that summon spirits on command, but because they help you focus your awareness and create structure for the interaction. And structure matters. So when people try to connect with guides or ancestors with absolutely no framework, it can feel like they're just sitting there thinking into the void. Ritual, tools, dedicated space, these all give your mind something to anchor to. So, one of the simplest ways to begin initiating contact is honestly just speaking to them out loud or in your head. Either one works. It doesn't have to be poetic. You don't have to memorize ancient invocations, but you can literally just say something like, any spirit or ancestors who are aligned with my highest good and well being, I welcome your presence and guidance. And that's it. It's short, it's clear, and it's intentional. And notice the wording, because there's boundaries there. And those boundaries matter. You're not inviting just anything wandering through the spiritual neighborhood. You're specifically inviting guides and ancestors who have your well being in mind. So, once you open that line of communication, the next step is usually like creating a regular practice where you sit with that awareness. Some witches like to do this through meditation. Some like to do it through journaling. Others prefer a ritual space with candles or incense. And there isn't one correct method. It's just going to be what calls to you and what feels right to you. But I will say that consistency helps. If you set aside even 10 minutes here and there, where you intentionally sit in that awareness, maybe with a candle lit, maybe with a cup of tea, maybe just quietly acknowledging the presence of supportive spirits. You start building familiarity with that energetic space. And over time, that's when communication starts becoming easier to recognize. Now, let's just talk about like one of the most common practices people use when working with ancestors specifically, which is an ancestor altar. Also does not have to be elaborate. I have had an ancestor altar for years. Um, just looking at it right now, it's a shelf. It's a shelf that I have hanging on my wall. It's fairly long. There is some cleansing spray up there. There's a protection spell jar I did. There is a black candle, a white candle, a little thing that I can burn incense on, a bowl, and a cup for water. Oh, and I have a little offering dish for any time I want to stick random food up there. Sometimes I feed them pizza. No, but yeah. So most ancestor altars do include like a few basic things, though. A candle, which is going to represent the presence of spirit and like illumination. A glass of water, which in many traditions is believed to help spirits draw close energetically. You can put photos of relatives. I guess I didn't include that when I told you. I don't have any photos of relatives specifically up there, but I have representation photos hanging on the wall. I have my altar set up for my indigenous ancestors. So I have like a Kokopelli. He is the indigenous god of fertility and music. I do have the Cherokee prayer. I have some arrows and a turkey feather that I found. There's a couple arrowheads up there. So, I mean, there is like things that make, specific. I'm not going to tell you exactly what's on my whole altar, but, but it's simple. It's not like, it sounds like a lot of stuff up there. It's really not. It looks very simple. So, I mean, a glass of water, photo. If you don't have photos of your relatives, you can just do something like that. You can use objects that remind you of family lineage. If you are one of the people that don't really know your lineage and you're looking it up, or you're not sure of your family history, specifically like actual humans that you knew, you don't have to have photos of them. You don't have to know their names. You can look up where you're from. Like if you know you're Irish, or you're Scottish, or you know where you're from, take things from that area that you connect with, traditions that you connect with, and then find something to represent that. And that's what you put up there, or down there where we have your altar set up. It doesn't have to be huge. It can even be like a little corner of your dresser. Okay. Sometimes offerings like flowers, food, coffee, tea, tobacco, these are items that hold sentimental value. And I will say about the tobacco, I have learned that a lot of ancestors from many different traditions tend to absolutely love tobacco, but you don't want to use like cigarette tobacco. You don't want to use things that are like filled with toxins and chemicals and stuff. So if you don't have access to fresh tobacco that you can dry and burn yourself, what I suggest is go to a smoke shop, or like somewhere that sells cigars. It does not have to be an expensive. Please hear me. It does not have to be an expensive cigar. Find a decent cigar, and then when you get home, cut it open with a box cutter, and you will find full tobacco leaves rolled up inside that cigar. That's how I used to get mine. I now have access to tobacco, but that's what I used to use because it's not polluted with a bunch of crap. Okay. Cigars are different than cigarettes. So yeah, if you just cut that open, there's going to be full leaves in there. Flowers. It's really not, I have this fairly large bowl up there. When I said there was a bowl, it's fairly large, but I can put water in it. And then if I ever do get fresh flowers, it's really nice sometimes to put water in that bowl and then just like pop the tops of the flowers off and just kind of let them float in the bowl. And then you can use that because like once it's on your altar and it's been charged and it's sat there for a little while and you've put intention to it, then you can kind of dip your hands in it. You can use that to like help you connect. It's really, really nice and they love that. Um, so it doesn't have to be like, straight up food. As far as food, they like sweets. They love sweets, honey, maybe a little bit of aloe, burning things like that. They really do like they love the smoke. The white candles, I don't know if this is true or not. I have a black one and a white one on mine. Don't quote me here because I don't know if this is true or not. But I heard from someone that I trusted. I found out later maybe I shouldn't have, but a lot of the teachings that he put out there were proper. Anyways, I heard that white candles specifically on an ancestor altar, or as many things white as you can get, because something about where they are, how things are for them on the other side is like they don't get the light. It's dark. They don't get things to be lit up. They don't get to see the color white much. And like I said, I don't know if that's true, but I always keep a white candle on mine, and I always try to keep the vibe and the overall kind of color scheme up there as light as possible. Like it's very different comparison to my actual witchcraft altar, but I try to keep things light because those are the colors that they can see. Those are the colors that they're attracted to and that they feel more comfortable in. That's what I heard, and I believe that. So, but that's just an opinion. Um, Again, like, and you're not giving offerings for like bribing. Like, I just put that video out there. You're not bribing them. It's about hospitality. Think of it like setting a place at the table for the people who came before you. When you sit at that altar, you can talk to them, you can thank them, you can ask for guidance or protection, or even just acknowledging them strengthens the connection over time. And something that's really interesting that a lot of people notice is that ancestor work tends to feel very warm. It's very warm. There's often a sense of like familiarity, comfort, protection. You feel less like summoning something unknown and more like reconnecting with a lineage that's already connected to you. So, when it comes to spirit guides, more broadly, many witches also like to use divination tools to help translate guidance into something more clear. So, like tarot cards are one of the most common, oracle cards, runes, pendulums. These are all tools that can help your mind and your intuition organize information in a more structured way. Okay, for example, somebody might sit down and say, I'd like guidance from my spirit guides regarding this situation, and then they pull 1 to 3 tarot cards and they interpret them. The cards themselves are not like the spirit speaking directly, but they give you intuition. They give you a language of symbols to work through. And a lot of times, people find that when they ask the same question over time, there's like patterns in the cards. They start becoming really consistent. Another way that people use divination in this context is for confirmation. Maybe you had a dream that felt really like an ancestor visiting, or maybe you've been feeling guided towards a certain decision. You can pull cards and ask something simple like, is this guidance that I dreamed about aligned with my highest good? You're not handing over the decision making power to the cards, you're just using them as a reflective tool. Another practice that some witches find really helpful is automatic writing or intuitive journaling. I actually do this. I do automatic writing. It's not like a service that I offer for others, but a lot of times when you guys, like when you send me your Hey Blue questions, or like the random the random messages in my inbox that I answer, I don't always know the answer. I'm not perfect, but if I don't know the answer, I'll tell you I don't know the answer. But like sometimes it's like I have this idea of how I want to answer, and I'll start typing. And this works whether you're writing with your hand or you're typing. Promise you. But you just kind of start typing. And as I'm typing, it's like the words just start to flow. And I cannot explain it. 9 out of 10 times, it's exactly what the person needed to hear. A lot of times it works better, like, like I said, if it's a direct question that has a specific answer and I don't know it, I'll just tell you I don't know it. But if it's like an advice type question, it usually like resonates. 9 times out of 10, it's what they needed to hear. Not always, but most of the time. I don't know where that comes from. The only thing I can tell you is something's coming, channeling through. And I've always done that. I've done that since for a really long time, actually. But that is definitely a way that you can just start writing. Grab a pen and a paper, start writing, see what comes out. Sometimes it'll surprise you. Um, this is sometimes it feels like you're just writing, like you're just writing your own thoughts at first, honestly. And sometimes you are, but over time, people often notice like the tone, the phrasing shifts in a way that feels different from your normal internal dialogue. So again, discernment is very important here because it can be a really interesting practice if that's something that you want to experiment with. It's definitely fun. It's interesting. Lots of things pop up that you wouldn't even have considered yourself, and you're like, wow, where did that come from? So dreams are also a surprisingly common place where guides and ancestors communicate. If you're trying to open that channel, you can literally say before going to sleep, I welcome guidance from my spirit guides or ancestors through dreams tonight, if it's aligned with my well-being. You want to add something in there to set those boundaries, right? So keep a notebook nearby for when you wake up, even if the dream is not clearly symbolic at first. Writing it down helps train your brain to notice patterns over time. And finally, something that I think is really important to say in a webinar full of witches is that your magic is not dependent on how fancy your tools are. You can have the most beautiful altar in the world and still struggle to hear your intuition if you're constantly second guessing yourself. You can have a single candle on a cluttered nightstand and still build a powerful relationship with your guides and ancestors if your intuition is clear. The tools support the practice, they do not replace awareness. At the end of the day, connecting with guides and ancestors is about building a relationship, and relationships grow through consistency, through respect and curiosity and time. And the more you show up with those qualities, the more natural the connection tends to become. So there is one more topic that I want to go over before we kind of like transition out of this little phase here. And that is trust. Trust is one of the biggest pieces of this whole conversation. And honestly, it's the part that most people struggle with the most, because when we talk about intuition, guidance, or spiritual awareness, what we really are talking about most of the time is learning to trust your own internal signals again. And for a lot of people, that's harder than it sounds. Most of us were raised in environments that trained us to question ourselves constantly. We're taught to prioritize logic, external opinions, and proof for everything, which has its place. Don't get me wrong, logic is important, critical thinking is important. But sometimes that conditioning also teaches people to completely ignore their instincts. You've probably had moments in your life where you have felt that something was off about a situation, but you talked yourself out of it, or you felt strongly about a decision, but someone else convinced you otherwise. And later you look back on that and you're like, I fucking knew it. I knew that, you know? So that feeling right there is what people are often referring to when they talk about intuition. Intuition isn't magical in the sense that it knows every detail about the future. It's more like your mind picking up on subtle information very quickly, patterns, energy, tone, behavior, and giving you a signal before your logical brain has finished analyzing everything. Spiritual traditions often say that guides or ancestors can work through that intuitive channel by nudging your awareness towards certain realizations. I'm approaching an hour here. I am going to go over just a little bit, but I want to, there's like 5 things. I'm going to scroll down through here again. There's 5 things that I wanted to go over before this ends. And then there's one thing at least that I would like to read from you from the book, because it answers one of the questions. So it'll kind of like, we'll transition into the questions here in just a second. Let me figure out down here because there's like some misconceptions that I wanted to talk about. Um, I had so much on here. I just kept adding stuff. Holy cow. My phone is going crazy. Well, if I can find them. I put so much stuff in here. Okay, here they are. So, just a couple things that I wanted to throw out there um, that are just kind of like common misconceptions, just food for thought, right? Um, I'm trying to see where it started. Okay, here we go. So, one of the biggest misconceptions is the idea that every spirit guide is some kind of like ancient all-knowing master, which we've talked about this several times now throughout this. I just really wanted to make that clear that you need to have boundaries. You're not going to work with every single spirit guide. um, in reality, guides can come from many different backgrounds. Some of them absolutely have a broader spiritual perspective, but others may simply just be spirits who have taken on supportive roles because of connection or compatibility or shared purpose. They're guides. They're not flawless cosmic supervisors. There's a part of the book in here that's going to answer one of the questions where somebody had asked me like about the different types of guides. That's what I want to read to you from here. Another misconception, though, is the belief that ancestors only show up if you have some kind of perfect family history, and that is not true. A lot of people worry about this, and they'll say things like, "Well, my family was complicated, so I don't know if I should work with my ancestors." But ancestors are not limited to the people who raised you or the relatives that you personally know. You come from thousands of people who lived before you. Within that lineage, there are individuals who care deeply about the continuation of their family line. Those supportive presences are usually the ones who step forward. Your spiritual support system is not defined by the difficult parts of family history. And even more than that, they're not even all human. They're not even all human. So, I mean, just really consider before you discard everything that there's just so much behind you. There's so much history. Your spiritual support, or I'm sorry, another misconception is that like the idea of having to constantly communicate with guides in order to maintain a connection. Like we were just talking about this in another chat not long ago. You do not have to become a slave to your ancestor altar. It is not something that you absolutely have to do daily or you're going to screw it up. You can decide to have like a weekly meeting, right? You can decide to have a monthly meeting. What's important that is you don't commit to something or throw something out there that you know you're not going to be able to deliver on. Don't overcommit yourself. If you want to do, you want to have that consistency, spread it out to where you know you're going to be able to do it. Um, just like human relationships, spiritual relationships can exist without constant conversation. Your guides are not going to disappear because you went a few months focusing on work or school or family or whatever else life requires. They're not offended by you living your life. Um, the fourth one that I really wanted to clear up is the belief that every sign is a message. Sometimes people get so focused on finding signs that everything becomes symbolic. You see a bird, that must mean something. You see in the number 1111, that must mean something. You find a coin on the ground, that must mean something. And sometimes, sure, because synchronicities do happen, but sometimes a bird is just a bird. Healthy spiritual awareness includes discernment, being able to recognize meaningful patterns without forcing meaning into every random moment. And the last one that I wanted to go over, or at least touch on, is the idea that spiritual awareness makes someone special or superior, because it does not. Intuition sensitivity, awareness. These are human capacities. Some people naturally notice them earlier, some people develop them later, some people simply choose to not explore them at all. And that's fine. None of those options make someone better or worse. Spiritual awareness is not about ranking people, it's about understanding yourself and your experiences more clearly. And the truth is that the more you explore this in a balanced way, the more normal it starts to feel to you. It becomes less about chasing mystical experiences and more about understanding your life with a little more depth. So, with that being said, I want to get into one of the questions that was in the chat um, about the different kinds of guides. Because by the way, this is Honoring Your Ancestors by Mallory. I cannot pronounce her last name, but I'm going to show you on the screen here. Okay. And this is like a guide to ancestor veneration. I recommend this book to beginners. And I say that, I have to say that with a little bit of like, take it with a grain of salt, because it is very beginner oriented. This is a great foundation. It will help you build a great foundation. The thing about this book, though, is that you need to take from it, just like any other book, you need to take from it what resonates with you, what you think is going to work for you, and leave the rest. Okay. Because there are a lot of great foundational knowledges and explanations in this book. There's also some things that it's not that I don't agree with it or that it's wrong. I just don't connect with it, and it's not the way that I would do it. But lots of people would do it that way. So I'm not gonna let that stop me from recommending it to you. You know what I'm saying? Because it's not wrong. It's not wrong. Just take it and adapt it to what you feel right with. But anyways, like I said, there is a lot of really good foundational knowledge in here, which is why I still recommend it. But I wanted to give you this kind of like these like definitions in here of different ancestors, because I found this really, really interesting. This is my second time actually reading this book. I'm reading it again with book club, I guess, but I've read it before, but this is one of my favorite parts of this book. So just the different explanations. You have blood ancestors. This is what most people think of when they hear the word ancestors. This group includes your parents, your parents' parents, your parents' parents' parents, and so on and so forth, all the way back to the mitochondrial Eve. There's an explanation about that in the front of the book, though. We have a special relationship with our blood ancestors because they created our bodies with their bodies, and because their body is the foundation for all other work in this lifetime, both in ancestor veneration and in other pursuits. I encourage my students to honor this group first. Everything that you want to do, you will find easier if your body is in good health. But what does it mean to honor one group of ancestors first? That will vary from person to person. So you have your blood ancestors. I'm trying to like not read the whole thing, but then you have recently deceased relatives. In dreams and visions, the blood ancestors may appear as individuals or as a collective. The recently deceased may appear in a form that resembles what they were like in life. In my experience, the recently deceased can be some of the most difficult ancestors to work with. Death is a profound and challenging process. In many cultures, it is believed that the dead must travel over a bridge to return to the spirit world to be renewed. In southern Italy and Sicily, this bridge is called, there's no way I could pronounce that, but it is said to be covered in knives, needles, and thorns. This belief is reflected in Catholic doctrine of purgatory, where the recently deceased are purified before they can be reunited with God. It can be helpful to pray for these ancestors so that their passage to the afterlife is quicker and less painful. Offerings of cool water, light, soft white cloth is also helpful. And that does kind of reinforce the white thing that I was talking about earlier. So then you have lineage ancestors. Some ancestors aren't part of our direct bloodline back to the mitochondrial Eve, but they feel so close to us that they might as well be. These are lineage ancestors. Often lineage ancestors are formally adopted through signing binding papers or rituals which resemble a rebirth. They can include the blood ancestors of adoptive parents, the ancestral in-laws who adopt us through marriage, or ancestors who are acquired when we are formally adopted into an initiatory lineage. So that is like lineage ancestors, and that's another one of those. So that's like a category of the ancestors that don't necessarily have to have your bloodline. And then it covers adoption specifically because I get asked this a lot. If you were adopted, you may wish to set aside some time to reflect on your respective relationships with your blood and adoptive families. I'm losing my voice. Either or both of these lines may stand up to bless you immediately as you begin your ancestor veneration practice. You should follow your instincts regarding whether you wish to honor one of those lines or more than the other, or both of them equally. Even if you notice that the two seem more aloof as you begin, you may find that you continue this work. The quiet line will become more actively interested in you. There are partnership ancestors. So, as marriage becomes less popular, new relationship arrangements become more common, a certain degree of discretion may be needed to assess whether the partner's ancestors act as lineage ancestors for you. If you're not married but wondering whether your partner's ancestors act as your lineage ancestors and vice versa, consider whether you have made any formalized declaration of commitment to each other in front of your families and community. In my experience, ancestors tend to respond to this sort of ceremony, and you may find that you feel closer during important rituals such as like coming of age ceremonies, graduations, funerals. Consequently, these are times when you should be on your best behavior and when divination is particularly powerful. Um, there are initiation, that's not, but there are affinity ancestors. I'm running out of time. There are affinity ancestors, there are saints. It covers spirit guides, it covers ghosts, it covers land spirits, house spirits, non-human ancestors. That one, listen to this. As a species, humans did not appear out of thin air. We evolved out of animals, who evolved out of fungi, who evolved out of plants, and so on. The whole web of life on Earth is one family. This means that after a certain point, your ancestors and even living relatives are no longer human. You may find that your ancestral line has a particular affinity to certain plants or animals. You may absolutely include these in your ancestor veneration practice. In my work as an herbalist, I address certain plants as my elders and I treat them with the same respect that I would give to my great grandparents, because the boundary between us as humans and other life forms is very fuzzy. I think it's absolutely appropriate to include deceased pets in your ancestor veneration practice as well. So, this book just really has a lot of interesting information, interesting takes, different perspectives for you to consider. This is available on Witchsea. It is currently sold out right now, but Tarot Fellow does carry this on Witchsea. He will be restocking, I'm sure, at some point. That's actually who I got it from, so I'm sure that that's going to be restocked eventually. Keep an eye on that. I'm sure you can find it in other places too, but but we want to support Witchsea. So make sure you definitely look for this. This is like a really good starting place. It gives you the foundation, it gives you the basics, it gives you something to build on. And that's the most important thing that we're trying to accomplish here. Do we want to move into some other questions?
Yeah. Let's do
I've
that.
talked so stupid.
Which crystals do you recommend to keep around or work with to encourage communication and connection?
Ooh, labradorite, amethyst, lepidolite. Those would be my top three.
Mm-hmm. Let's see. So I don't know. I think we might have answered this. What is a must-have to put on an ancestral altar?
Most ancestor altars, at least the very basics, maybe a cloth of some sort if you can, and then some water. It's kind of like traditional to either have the picture like on the wall behind the water or set directly in front of the water, and then you want to have a candle of some sort, either behind or in front of the water. But that's like the basics: the cloth, the candle, a picture, or if you don't have a picture, just something that represents your lineage or where you come from, that's going to help you call. Just, you're making the pathways right for the brain. It's a symbolic thing, so you just want to have something that relates to your lineage there. In the candle, if you want to do offerings, like I said, highly suggest smoke, tobacco. If you cannot do smoke, like I said, you can do a bowl of water. You can put some flowers in there. They love that. You could even, if you have access to fresh tobacco, you can kind of like put the fresh tobacco up there, let it dry out, and then discard it, return it back to the earth if you don't want to burn it. Um, but they really like tobacco. So, in my own personal experience, that's what I offer the most: water, tobacco, smoke, and flowers.
All right. I really like this one. Do spirit guides take forms not necessarily physical, but appear visually human, angelic, animals, etc.? Also, do we inherently have spirit guides with us and just need to tune in, or is it more like petitioning a deity?
Yeah, so that's like that was actually the kind of the question that I was trying to answer
Okay.
with the book, just to give you the idea that there are multiple different kinds of ancestors and spirit guides. So I tend to work with my more direct lineage, or the ones that come to me or call to me or have offered their help. But you can definitely explore the different ways. I mean, like I said, there's you can include deceased pets. There you can include plants that you feel very drawn to. Do like if you feel really drawn to like a specific plant or something, this is I guess how I would go about that to affirm, but I would do some kind of divination and just kind of like ask questions around that plant, um to see if you can get some kind of affirmation if you had some kind of ancestral connection to that type of plant. But you also have, like I said, there are saints, there are affinity ancestors, spirit guides, ghosts, related spirits. There's land spirits, which is particularly a plot of land, may include humans, animals, plants, fungi, any other organisms that were born or lived or died on that land. It's important to honor them. House spirits. Some people say house spirits are essentially land spirits, the spirits of the land the house stands on or the natural materials used to build the house. There's non human ancestors, like we talked about that just now. But yes, they do also appear in form. Like they will appear to you in dreams. You will see fleeting things out of the corner of your eye. And the scientific explanation for that, by the way, heard this explained like really well. So our eyes are like T-Rex eyes. Okay. We have like the little cones and the little triangle things in our eyes. So when you see something out of the corner of your eye and it's moving, and then you like look and it's not there, it's gone. It's like the same concept as a T-Rex. Like when a T-Rex looks directly at you, it can't see you anymore. It's the same. So you can even train yourself. Like I worked on this for a little while, and then it's one of those things that I just frivolously did, and then I like, frolicked off into something else. But you can train yourself to become aware of when you see something moving out of the corner of your eye. Don't look at it. Do not turn your head. Look at it. Keep looking straight ahead, but be aware that it's there in your peripheral, and you can almost get a better look at it that way. Just don't directly look at it.
That's cool. What are the common spirits or ancestors that you call to?
Me, I do. Okay, so I do my indigenous. I'm going through a thing. I'm currently going through a thing. I've had an ancestor altar for a very long time. I have mostly honored my indigenous ancestors because they are the ones that came to me in form. Like they are the ones that I said I had the experience where I could like see, touch, hear them. It was crazy, but they're the ones that reached out. And so I switched everything around and I started to honor them. Um, I can trace them back on my family tree. Like this is like a legitimate bloodline thing. But also, when I did my DNA test, I was English, Scottish, Irish, and Welsh. So I've really neglected that side of my ancestry as far as my altar and who I'm trying to connect with, because I've always just felt way more drawn to my indigenous side. Um, so lately, I don't know what happened. This was literally just a couple weeks ago, and like I've had people of my subscribers have been laughing at me because I just went through this whole. I'm sitting on the couch and I'm just like, it's got to go. It's all got to go. I'm like, this moment happened where I just had to jump up and I just cleaned off my entire altar. I wiped everything down. I cleaned it all. I reorganized. I took things off of it. I put new things on it. And I'm like, I feel like it's just been out of balance for a while. Like I've been neglecting this whole other part of me that now for whatever reason I'm being called to explore. So even after having an altar of 20 of I've had an altar for about 20 years, but the ancestor altar has been a little less. I want to say like 10 years. But even after 10 years, it's a never ending journey. It's going to change and you're going to grow as a person and it grows with you. So, like, you can literally outgrow your altar. You might absolutely love your altar, think it's beautiful, feel so connected to it. And then one day you're like, it's not working. I need to change something.
Robin asked, what DNA test would you recommend?
I did Ancestry DNA. What I will say about them is I think it's really cool because they've made a lot of updates since I did mine. I did mine a long time ago. Um, so they now have included like 50 something more regions, as far as narrowing it down to what parts of what regions you're from. Like, they've added a lot of stuff. You can't see, the downside is you can't see everything unless you pay for it, and they can be expensive. But if you're just looking to get the test and find out your percentages and things like that is free to look at. You can do a family tree on there. You can it gives you these like little insights about each person. So like if there's anything known about each person, like say there was an article in the newspaper about them or there's photos of them floating around on the internet, everything will be there. The only thing is you can't access it unless you pay for the account. So it has its like pros and cons. I know there's a couple other ones, but I don't have experience with them. I will also say that if you're looking for your indigenous side, if you have indigenous, that tests out of DNA. So don't, because I did this, don't go into it thinking that this is like you as a person, because it doesn't pick up everything. You get, when two people come together, the offspring only gets 50% of each person's DNA. And eventually, later, like, further back in the tree, that disappears. That DNA disappears and it can no longer be picked up. So for my indigenous ancestors, I showed 0 indigenous on the test. But when I traced my tree back, I can trace it back to full blood Cherokee. So it's just been it's tested out of my DNA. So you just kind of have to, again, something else that you got to take with a grain of salt. If
Tony
you,
said, oh,
oh, go
sorry.
ahead. It's okay. Go ahead.
Tony said you mentioned a teacher guide. Is this someone we can ask to connect to and request guidance on reading cards, pendulum, and other divination tools?
Mm-hmm. You can definitely do that. You can do that with any spirit guides. Um, you can request like, and they all, like I said, they all, you have certain ones that are with you all the time. You have certain ones that are with you for a reason, right? So if you're seeking guidance on a particular situation, you could even word it as, could the ask your question and then say, I would like this guidance to come from the guides that are in my spiritual court with my highest interests in mind, who are also the best fit to answer this question or the most experienced in this category. Or how you word it is really everything. You're not limited to just getting guidance from whoever you get guidance from. You can choose who your guidance comes from.
And Tony also had another question I thought was really good. What are the more effective ways to elevate our personal vibration so we can receive and interpret those ancestral messages?
Well, if you're just trying to elevate your vibration, movement definitely. You can elevate the energy around you. You can meditate. Ancestral spirit guide things tend to come through when your mind is very clear and settled. So I say movement because it's different than like when you're trying to raise energy for a spell. But when I say movement, I don't mean like dance around and move. I mean like I stem. So um this kind of like quiet, this is meditative to me. And that's, I'm going to zone out better doing this than I am doing this. I'm just now it's going to wander. My mind's going to wander everywhere. So just anything that you can do to help you kind of zone into like a meditative state. Like, and it honestly depends on how you're trying to get the guidance too. So because like some people will read candles, some people will read cards. So it really just, I don't know. That one's difficult to answer because I need to know how do you plan on, if we got 5 more minutes. So let me know, how do you plan on asking how, for the guidance? What tools are you using, or are you just using yourself?
All right. And there
Because
was
I
one
think
last
it's going to vary.
there was one last question which we already answered, which was what books do you suggest for spirit guides? So, and you said that the ancestral guide, honoring your ancestors, is the best
Yeah,
one.
am gonna recommend this, and also when we do, so I haven't like we haven't posted anything about it yet, but um tarot fellow that sells things on Witchsea, he is like crazy talented psychic medium. So we're gonna do like a webinar together. We're still studying the details for it, but we are gonna do one together. We're kind of gonna be on here like this together. And he has probably so many recommendations as far as connecting with spirits and the books, because like I said, the things that he sells on Witchy and the books that he sells, he vets that information. Like he doesn't just say, oh, here's a book, I'm going to sell it. He will take that book and he will like actually flip through it. He will look at the information. He will see like, okay, does this stand? Is it ethical? Is it, you know what I'm saying? Like he vets his books. So definitely come back for that webinar if you are interested in other book recs, because this is really the only one I have read. Other than that, I have followed guidance from my own teachers and mentors. I have looked things up myself. I'm very self-taught. So a lot of the things that I do, like with my own altar and things, a lot of it's just intuitive. It's me connecting with how I need to connect with.
And let me just say that webinar that's coming up, Rick is hilarious, hilarious. So,
You guys are gonna laugh
oh
so
my
much.
God, you are gonna love him so much. Spirit Daddy, right? That's
Mhm. Yep,
his
Spirit Daddy.
medium persona, and he is fantastical. I'll just say that. You're
But
not gonna
he's
want to
like
miss that one.
somebody I'm gonna share because I was gonna because we're having this little meeting later. I'm gonna talk to him later actually and see if there's a specific video of him that I want to share on my Facebook to introduce my followers to him, and I want to see if he'll allow me to do that. But I just think that it like blows my mind sometimes because he's like the person that will just be sitting in his backyard and see a spirit come walking in and have a conversation with it. Like,
He's
I
incredible.
wish I could get my like intuitive abilities that in tune.
Yeah, no kidding. I mean, you guys are, I cannot say enough. When she told me they were planning this, I screamed because it is going to be phenomenal. You are not going to want to miss it.
I cannot wait. I cannot wait.
Yeah.
He's so full of information too,
Oh, I
though.
know.
Like, it's just
Yeah.
so much.
I know. I'm excited. I'm excited for it. So yeah, but we'll let you guys know it's coming up in April. So we'll get a date set. We'll get the full April schedule set very soon. So you guys can have some heads up on what's coming up. So, and then tomorrow, if you guys are around, free event with Tam tomorrow. She's going to be it's fully interactive, free event. 2 o'clock Eastern time tomorrow. She's going to be answering questions. She's going to be doing tarot readings for people in the audience. You're going to throw your questions up. If she kind of gets a chance to grab you at that moment, she's going to do a one card read. So, chance to ask her some questions tomorrow. It's going to be a lot of fun. So.
I said I want to go to that. I'm gonna come hang out with you
Yeah,
guys.
and I hope you do. Yeah, it's going to be a monthly event. So she's going to do it every month. So if you can't make it this time, it's going to be forward. It's going to be 1 hour every month. She's going to take free questions. So it's going to be a lot of fun. But
And then
but
don't forget to go to the events tab on my page so that you
yes,
can, because we have the intro to dreams on Monday, the Money Bowl
Money Bowl
webinar workshop is next Friday. So this is the last day
today.
for you to order the Money Bowl kit if you want it. Um, you can still order it. It
Yeah,
just may not get to you on time.
right.
So if you want it to be to you on time for the webinar, you need to order it by the end of today, probably.
Yep. Yep. I would say so. But I want to thank you all so much for being with us this afternoon and, again, supporting
I'm a
us.
whole different person on TikTok. That's scary. I hate it. I hate it when my Facebook people find me on TikTok, and I don't like it when my TikTok people find me on Facebook because I'm like two different personas.
Exactly. All right, guys, thank you so much for coming tonight and again supporting the Blue Witch and supporting me and Witchsea. We really appreciate it. And this will be up on Witchsea Academy momentarily. Bye, guys.